Hey guys, tonight we venture back in time to a place where the sand is white, the Nile is shimmering, and your head is uncomfortably bald by societal expectation. You're walking down a sun-bleached avenue in ancient Memphis, palm trees rustling faintly, the scent of incense winding through the hot, dry air like a lazy cobra. You're sweating naturally. It's Egypt. It's always Egypt. And on top of that freshly shaved scalp sits your most prized possession, a meticulously crafted, high-maintenance wig. Layers of human hair, maybe goat, maybe even dyed palm fiber, all lovingly curled and lacquered into something so regal it could have its own throne. And you're terrified it might melt. That's right, melt. This is not just a fashion piece, it's a status symbol, a spiritual shield, a flirtation device, and you're one shot at making sure nobody in the temple courtyard notices you're basically hairless underneath. But one wrong angle under Ra's judgmental sunbeam and that beeswax base. Yeah? It's Drip City. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it by you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start at the marketplace. The sun is already high, and vendors shout over each other in the musical chaos of morning trade. There's a stall to your left selling lotus oil, another selling barley, beer, and directly ahead, under a canopy made of woven reeds and ambition, is a wig stand. It's less a booth and more of a shrine. Perched upon sculpted wooden heads are towering coils of braided fiber, some tight and ebony, some streaked with ochre, a few streaked with gold dust for extra flair. These aren't your average Halloween store wigs. These are architectural marvels. You half expect to see scaffolding, and these things weren't optional. In elite Egyptian society, especially among priests, priestesses, nobles, and anyone with even the faintest whiff of importance, your hair was either non-existent or pretend. Shaved heads were cleaner, cooler, and supposedly made you more spiritually available to the gods. But that left the sun beating directly on your skin. Solution: the wig, a wearable climate compromise. Mainstream records from Theban tombs and reliefs show nobles, both male and female, decked out in braids that would make a Kardashian feel underdressed. Yet these weren't just thrown on, they were carefully applied, often with assistance, wax sealed into place using brace-yourself heated beeswax. And beeswax, as you might suspect, is less than ideal when it hits a cozy 40 degrees Celsius. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians used specific rituals or cooling techniques before applying their wigs in summer months. Some suggest shade structures or early forms of cooling oil were used beforehand. Others claim that the answer is disappointingly practical. You just didn't go outside unless you had to. You stop at the booth, the merchant. A wiry man with no eyebrows but a rather smug expression beckons you over. He gestures proudly to his finest piece, a triple-tiered black braided marvel, affixed with carnelian beads and reeking of sandalwood. You reach out, tentatively. The surface is oddly soft but firm, like cooled caramel. Just above you, a clay canopy offers some shade, and for a second, the wind shifts, warm but gentle. The merchant leans in and mutters something that makes you laugh. Don't turn your head too fast. You might fling a braid into someone's lentils. Later that night, as the sun finally sinks into the Nile and the city hums with quieter energy, you spot a noblewoman at a small gathering. Her wig is impossibly high. It glows faintly in the candlelight, and you watch as a servant carefully pats a cloth beneath the base absorbent linen, douse it in something that smells like cucumber and lavender. You realize the solution wasn't always keeping the wig from melting. Sometimes, it was managing the melt gracefully, like a soft-serve cone on a warm day. And you're beginning to understand why an entire culture became obsessed with the perfect headpiece in a place that never let you forget your scalp existed. You wake the next morning before the sun has fully broken over the horizon, mostly because your wig, safely stored on a carved acacia stand, gave you an itchy dream about honeybees. You pad quietly across the cool stone floor, step outside, and squint toward the temple quarter. Today, you're visiting the barbers. Yes, the sacred barbers. In ancient Egypt, Being bald wasn't a fashion failure, it was an achievement. A clean-shaven head symbolized purity, hygiene, and a deep commitment to the gods, or at least to not dying of heat stroke while wearing a 7-pound hair sculpture. Even pharaohs went bare up there. Your daily look, one gleaming dome, and a wig with enough personality to get its own seat at dinner. Priests and priestesses, especially, were required to shave not just their heads but their entire bodies, twice a day. That's dedication, or maybe superstition. Historians still argue whether this was for religious purity or simply an ancient workaround to lice. Probably both. You enter the narrow shop, where a man with hands like smooth limestone greets you. No mirrors, just a bowl of water, a blade so sharp it might cut time itself, and a quiet rhythm as he works. You sit. The razor touches your scalp. One long, careful pass, then another. A small breeze swirls dust outside. You hear temple bells in the distance, the faint clatter of donkey carts. But in here, it's just scraping steel and the occasional drop of rosewater dabbed behind the ear. You're being purified, or scalped for fashion, or both. Once you're hairless again, the barber offers you a cloth and a choice. Do you want your daily wig or your special events wig? You pause. Today feels like a day for the good one. He smiles, disappears into the back, and returns holding something that gleams faintly, like obsidian under starlight. The base is a tight basket weave of linen threads soaked in cedar oil. Above that, braids coiled like cinnamon buns, rich black and inhumanly uniform. It smells faintly of myrrh. A wig like this could get you invited to the governor's table, or at least admired by a priest with suspiciously perfect eyeliner. You lower your head, and he places it gently on piles, adjusting the weight like you might settle a crown. And there it is again, that weird wobble of pride and mild terror, because if this thing melts before noon, your reputation melts with it. Outside, you catch your reflection in a polished bronze plate. Not bad. Regal. Slightly ridiculous. But that's kind of the point. Fringe records mention one priest who refused to remove his wig, even in the bathhouse, claiming it was infused with Ra's blessing. Others tell of nobles who employed slaves to carry parasols everywhere, just to protect their elaborate braids from liquefying into a scented puddle. And the danger wasn't just melting. You've heard whispers that rival nobles might accidentally tip a hot oil lamp too close, or leave you seated near the kitchen fire during a feast. Wigs sabotage a real threat in high society. You walk past two women trading gossip in the shade of a tamarisk tree. One gestures toward her scalp with theatrical dismay. I told her not to wear the myrrh blend at midday. It always drips. You pass through the temple courtyard, and your wig, safely waxed and pinned, remains heroically intact. You breathe a sigh of relief. You've survived the first 3 hours of the day, but the sun's just getting started, and your scalp, still sweating like a goat at a lion's birthday party. You walk with a carefully balanced head and a mildly clenched jaw, because you know full well that even a slight gust of hot wind could shift your meticulously waxed curls. But that's part of the daily gamble, just you, the elements, and a small mountain of artfully arranged hair riding your skull like it owns the place. You make your way toward the market, where wig makers bustle beneath linen awnings stretched between sun-bleached columns. This is where the real magic happens. Wigs in ancient Egypt weren't just accessories. They were architectural marvels, stitched, padded, woven, perfumed, and engineered to survive both fashion scrutiny and the occasional sandstorm. As you duck under the awning, the smell hits you first: cedar oil, burnt resin, and a strange undertone of goat fat. Welcome to the heart of the Egyptian hair economy. A young apprentice scurries by, balancing a tray of braids made from papyrus fibers dyed black. Another hands a client a cooled clay skull cap, a wig base, freshly hardened and ready for layering. You pause beside a merchant showing off his wares, genuine imported hair from Nubia. He says, as if it were gold. It might as well be. Historians still argue whether most wigs were made with actual human hair or a mix of palm fibers, dyed wool, and occasionally horse mane. Probably all of the above, depending on your status and the thickness of your purse. You brush your fingers over a half-finished piece, It's an intricate thing, with tight rows of curls set into waxed linen cords. Wig makers used beeswax mixed with frankincense and oil to create a moldable, fragrant styling paste. It worked wonders until the temperature hit 104 and you forgot to shade yourself. The chief artisan, an older man with blue-stained fingernails from indigo dye, invites you to watch. He dips a comb into warm wax, works it through the base fibers, and begins the curl twist. It's hypnotic, like watching a basket form out of scent and rhythm. There's a small pile of decorative pins beside him, bone, ivory, even a few bronze pieces shaped like lotus flowers, not for securing the wig to your head. Mind you, for flair, a good wig didn't just sit on your scalp, it announced things. Your wealth, your marital status, maybe your astrological sign. One woman was buried wearing a wig adorned with 7 tiny falcons, no one's sure why. Possibly a family joke, possibly a protection charm, possibly just falcon season. In a shaded corner, a priest is being fitted for his ceremonial headdress, an enormous structured piece layered in concentric waves. We only use hair from virgins for temple wigs, the artisan whispers, raising an eyebrow, or so the scrolls say. Personally, I think they just mean it's untangled. You thank the master wig maker and wander toward a side stall where children play a game with palm-wrapped mannequin heads. They're seeing who can balance the most hair pieces at once without toppling over. One kid has 4 stacked like a pastry tower. Another's wig just slid into his eyes. Chaos. Historical cuteness. It's easy to forget this is an industry, but wigs in Egypt weren't optional. They were social armor. Without one, you might be mistaken for a servant or worse, a sun-baked commoner. Even soldiers were sometimes buried with wigs, just in case the afterlife came with formal dinners. You duck out of the stall's shade and immediately feel your own wig respond, wax tightening slightly, edges shifting ever so subtly against your scalp. You resist the urge to adjust it. That's how accidents happen. One wrong tug and you're walking home looking like a half-plucked ibis. Instead, you walk on like a pro, just another Egyptian with a head full of ambition and a secret fear of direct sunlight. The smell of beeswax never really leaves your nose. It's earthy and sweet. But after an hour in the sun, it turns into something halfway between warm honey and panic. You can feel it softening just slightly under the crown of your wig as you walk through the temple gates. You're here to witness the most elite hairstyling event in the city, the preparation of a high priestess's ceremonial curls inside the limestone complex. It's cooler, thank the gods. Thick walls, shaded courtyards, and strategically placed pools keep the temperature manageable. You follow the gentle tapping of sandals on polished stone until you reach a side chamber filled with soft humming and fragrant oils. The priestess is seated on a stool shaped like a lioness. Her head is tilted just so, her eyes closed, and her patience visibly thinning. A team of attendants encircle her like artists at an easel. One massages scented oil into her shaved scalp, hibiscus and myrrh. Another brushes a layer of beeswax onto the wig base, softening it with heat from a tiny clay burner. The wig itself, half assembled on a wooden form nearby, looks more like a mosaic than a hairpiece. Carefully arranged ringlets of human hair, sheep wool, and a few narrow ribbons of gold-leafed linen threaded between. Every curl tells a story, one of the attendants mutters as she twists another spiral into place. That may sound poetic, but in this case, it's also literal. Specific curl patterns signified different temples, occasions, or deities. The goddess Hathor preferred elaborate cascading curls, Isis, long braids with resin-soaked ends. Nephthys allegedly favored straight styles, though historians still argue whether that was her choice or a result of a bad mythological haircut gone viral on temple walls. The team works in near silence. Occasionally, one hums a tune, a lullaby, maybe, or a chant used to keep the bees calm during wax collection. You ask about the resin mix, and an older woman gestures to a pot bubbling over low heat, frankincense, pine pitch, and a bit of natron ash, she says, for texture, and to keep the curls from becoming enthusiastic. It turns out curls had a personality of their own. In the Egyptian heat, ringlets could slowly unwind if left to their own devices. That's why wig stylists used pins carved from ivory and shell to lock everything in place. and why many wigs had small, hidden braids support structures, like scaffolding for a sculpted hairstyle. Think of it as the architectural blueprint of your forehead. You peer closer and notice something curious. Inside the wig's lining is a tiny clay amulet shaped like a scarab, not uncommon. Apparently, some people believed their wigs could carry spiritual energy, and protective charms were woven in just in case a particularly judgmental deity showed up to inspect your part line. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether wigs were purely cosmetic or had religious significance. Some think temple wigs acted as extensions of divine identity stand-ins for cosmic order on your scalp. Others think it was just a clever way to avoid scalp burn and look fabulous at the same time. Personally, you suspect it's both. One of the stylists gently lifts the finished wig and sets it on the priestess's head. She does not flinch. The curls fall perfectly around her shoulders, bouncing slightly. Even under their waxed stiffness, a final touch. A dot of lotus oil behind each ear. The scent is subtle, the movement ceremonial. Done. You catch your reflection in a polished copper plate on the wall. Your own wig looks okay, a little windblown. One curl has definitely started plotting its escape. You pat it down and whisper to it like a misbehaving toddler. In the corner, another wig waits its turn. It's huge, black with bronze threads woven through, a showpiece for an upcoming festival. Apparently, you'll need neck training to wear that one. Someone jokes, or a second neck. Outside, the sun has lowered, casting golden lines across the courtyard floor. But even with the shift in light, the wigs don't glisten, they glow. That's the trick of beeswax and resin. Not just hold, but shine. As you leave, you hear one of the stylists mutter, "Pray to Hathor the wax holds." You don't know if she's joking. You really hope she is. By the time you arrive at the palace courtyard, the party is already in full swing, and so is the melting. The stone floors shimmer under torchlight, and every guest who's anyone is fanning themselves with something expensive: ostrich feathers, dyed papyrus, or in one case, what might actually be a small peacock. Somewhere a harpist plucks the same 7 notes over and over. Like the musical version of dehydration, you weave between tables stacked with honey-drenched pastries and bowls of pomegranate seeds, all while trying to keep your wig from sliding. The beeswax has begun to soften, and you're starting to understand why no one sits too close to the fire pits. Elite Egyptian banquets were as much about politics as they were about peacocks and pomegranates. Invitations were a form of social currency who you were seen with, how elaborate your wig was, how many amulets jingled when you nodded your head, and of course, how gracefully you could recover when your hairpiece drooped into your lentil stew. You spot a nobleman across the courtyard whose wig has, unfortunately, gone full collapse. The curls, once so buoyant, now sag like overcooked noodles. An attendant rushes over with a perfumed cloth and a bowl of chilled natron water to gently blot the wig back into shape. It doesn't help. You pretend not to notice. Everyone pretends not to notice. That's what manners are for. Ancient banquet etiquette had rules. No showing off too much jewelry unless it was given by the pharaoh. No correcting someone else's pronunciation of Hathor. And under absolutely no circumstances should your wig fall into the ceremonial beer jug, which it turns out is exactly what just happened at the next table over. There's a moment of silence. Then the priest seated beside the soggy offender gently removes his own headpiece, dabs it with his sleeve, and calmly places it back atop his bald dome. The room exhales. Historians still argue whether banquet wigs were designed for function or sheer drama. Some believe guests wore intentionally overdone styles just for comedic or theatrical effect. Others point to the enormous wig catalog found in tomb murals, with labels like "For Harvest Festivals," "Divine Impersonation," and, possibly, "Try not to faint" in this one. The star of the evening arrives late, as expected. She's the daughter of a high-ranking scribe, and her wig is a masterpiece. 3 tiers of braids, each rimmed with polished shells, tapering into a swirl of gold-tipped corkscrews. Atop it all sits a carved ivory lotus flower, balanced with impossible precision. You suspect an anti-gravity spell is involved. She sits. Her wig doesn't budge. A collective murmur of admiration ripples through the courtyard. You tug discreetly at your own beeswaxed mess and consider feigning a divine vision just to excuse yourself. Wig mishaps weren't always so polite. There are scrolls depicting full-on brawls at festivals when someone's resin-stiffened ponytail smacked another guest's goblet. One account describes a noblewoman chasing a servant halfway through Thebes because her fringe was misaligned. Apparently, the stakes were high as her bun. To combat this, some guests hired what were known as wig watchers, personal assistants armed with combs, scented cloths, and bowls of cool mud. Their job was to follow you through the evening, discreetly fixing any slip, slump, or shiny spot. A high priest was once said to have 8 wig watchers, which seems excessive until you remember the humidity in the papyrus wine. You find a quiet corner behind a pillar, hoping for a breeze. Instead, you find a very drunk bureaucrat mumbling something about papyrus quotas and gesturing wildly with a fig tart. His wig has fully rotated on his head and now faces backwards. It gives him a suspiciously owl-like appearance. You say nothing. You nod politely. You slowly back away. There is, of course, no AC, but a few clever engineers had created something close ceiling fans powered by servants or even small counterweights hidden behind walls. These fans circulated the air and kept wigs cool enough to survive most of the evening. That is, unless someone spilled honey on you, which someone just did. You stare down at your sleeve. Sticky, sweet, possibly a divine omen. You smile like it's fine, and internally begin composing your resignation letter from high society. At the end of the night, as the guests begin to leave and the sandals scuff across the sandstone, you catch glimpses of tired wigs sagging just slightly, as though exhaling. There's a shared understanding. We made it. No total collapses. No wigs in wine. A success. You step into the moonlight, the wax holding just long enough to make it to your transport. As your feet touch the sand outside the palace, you wonder how many wigs they'll find centuries from now preserved, melted, re-hardened like strange, coiled fossils, the quiet legacy of fashion versus climate. You trudge home in the moonlight, your sandals making gentle flapping sounds with each step. The evening desert air offers a coolness that feels like a whispered apology for the entire day's worth of sweat, dust, and wig-related anxiety. Your beeswax is finally solidifying again, too little, too late. You feel like a melted candle in a linen tunic. Back inside your modest villa, you collapse onto a woven mat, too tired to peel off the ceremonial eyeliner or rinse out the crushed lotus balm still lingering behind your ears. Instead, you lie flat and stare at the painted ceiling. It depicts Nut, the sky goddess, arched protectively over the earth. Her body is covered in stars and possibly, though this may be a trick of the pigmentine, elaborate wigs. You dream briefly of wax rivers and combs with teeth. When you wake, the sun is already sharpening its angles across your floor. Time to get up and face another day of wig maintenance. This morning, however, you're not alone. Your neighbor has come by to share a secret. "I found something," she whispers, eyes darting toward the street. A new formula. You raise an eyebrow. For what? For keeping wigs from melting. Longer, cooler, lighter. You stare at her. This is serious. She pulls a small jar from under her shawl. It's a grayish substance, faintly gritty, with a soft floral scent. It's crushed sycamore bark mixed with natron and a hint of date sap. Cools faster, holds longer, and doesn't make you smell like a festival goat. You take the jar reverently. This could change everything. Historians still argue whether these cooling wigs were widespread or reserved for elite priests. Some even think the formula was a state secret, passed down like a magical heirloom. The fact that your neighbor got it from her cousin's embalmer boyfriend only adds to the intrigue. Of course, you can't try it right away. You need to heat the wax, mix the paste, test the hold, and most importantly, see if it makes your scalp itch. Many a promising formula has been ruined by a case of temple rash. You enlist your wig assistant, a teenager who's only in it for the amulet stipend, and begin your experiment. There's boiling, stirring, brushing. You wait while the new paste sets. Then you step into the sun. Nothing melts. You blink. Nothing drips. The curls stay springy. The parting holds. You walk a full circle around your courtyard, swaying dramatically just to test the limits. Still intact. You may cry. You don't. Instead, you take out your mirror shard and admire yourself like a proper citizen of the 18th dynasty. This is how innovation spreads. Quietly, through neighbors and cousins and embalmers with side hustles. While the grand historians are scribbling records of wars and pharaohs, the real triumphs are happening in kitchens, courtyards, and back alleys where beeswax meets bark paste. In fact, some ancient texts hint that wig recipes were guarded like military secrets. There's one scroll that depicts two scribes battling over a cooling salve of Thebes, complete with insults like, "May your curls shrivel in Ra's breath." That seems harsh, but relatable. Later that afternoon, you stroll through the market wearing your new and improved hair. You're calm, confident, radiating an inner cool that no Nile breeze could match. A few heads turned. One woman drops her basket of dates. You nod graciously. You stop by the perfumer's stall. He leans in. "What are you wearing?" You smile. "Sycamore bark." He nods solemnly. "Dangerous." You nod back. "Revolutionary." A small boy tugs on your tunic. "Are you a priest?" "No." You say, "I'm just very well ventilated." The next week, everyone wants the formula. Demand explodes. Wig paste becomes the new gold. One ambitious merchant starts bottling desert cool wax in tiny alabaster jars with labels etched in lapis. He claims it was gifted by a god in a dream. Historians still argue whether any of this ever truly happened, or whether it was a metaphor for the rise of artisan class influence in cosmetic culture. But your scalp doesn't care about metaphors. Your scalp feels amazing. By the time you return home that evening, you've been invited to 4 more banquets, 1 royal inspection, and something ominously described as a wig duel. You're tempted, but also very sleepy. You place your wig gently on its carved cedar stand. You whisper to it, "You were perfect today." Then you slip into your bedroll and drift off, already dreaming of the next innovation. Maybe something for eyelashes that doesn't smell like fermented barley. You wake up to the muffled sound of a priest chanting just outside your window. It's still early. The sort of early where the light hasn't committed to being warm or cool yet, and the Nile hasn't fully decided whether to shimmer or sulk. You roll over and squint at your wig on its cedar stand, still flawless. A small victory. Today is the day you learn about temples. Not just the public ceremonies or the eye-catching obelisks, but the side rooms, the unswept corridors, and the sacred storage chambers where priests hide their extra sandals and emergency eyeliner. You've been invited to shadow a mid-ranking priest of Anubis, who, according to rumor, uses his wig not just for ceremony, but to store tiny scrolls of hymns between the layers. Whether that's true or just a side effect of the temple's poor filing system remains to be seen. As you follow him through the temple complex, you marvel at the precision. Every tile, every wall carving, even the way the braziers are placed, it all feels orchestrated by someone with very neat handwriting and too much time on their hands. The priest explains how wigs aren't just fashion here, they're spiritual tools. Certain wig styles represent different ranks. Curled ends might indicate a lector priest, while thick, geometric layers suggest you're authorized to handle sacred oils. Which makes you wonder, what happens if you just like curls? Do you accidentally get promoted? Historians still argue whether temple wig codes were enforced strictly or simply evolved as trends among the priesthood. Some evidence suggests a playful rivalry between temple schools like a wig-based version of college mascots. Picture it, the priests of Ptah in slick, minimalist black domes versus the priests of Horus rocking aggressive center parts and a lot of volume. You're shown into a side chamber where wigs are being stored neatly, hung on bronze hooks like offerings to the gods of headwear. The room smells of sandalwood, beeswax, and something faintly citrusy, probably citron balm to ward off lice, or possibly just to smell richer than the rival temple next door. Your guide picks up one particularly ornate piece, rows of tight, lacquered curls interwoven with lapis beads. "This one," he whispers, "was worn during lunar rites, only at night, never in direct sun. Because it's sacred." "No," he says, "because it melts instantly." He places it back reverently. You watch as an apprentice begins brushing a simpler wig using a porcupine quill comb. The strokes are slow, rhythmic. It's meditative, almost hypnotic. You realize that this isn't just grooming, it's worship. In this temple, caring for wigs is a way to center the soul. There's an old fragment of hymn carved on a wall nearby. "Let not the wax runneth wild upon Ra's gaze, nor shall thy curl fall astray before Osiris." Poetic. slightly threatening, very on-brand for ancient Egypt. You're handed a trial wig to practice. It's heavier than you expected, slightly damp, and smells like someone used too much myrrh and not enough common sense. But still, you wear it proudly. It's your first step toward understanding the spiritual geometry of temple hair. After lunch, which consists of figs, cold barley cakes, and a surprisingly spicy lentil paste, you're allowed to sit in on a cleansing ritual. It's part prayer, part spa treatment. The priest is lathered in a sacred soap made from natron, crushed peppermint, and lotus. Then comes the wig ritual, anointment, binding, recitation. He says something that stays with you. A wig is what separates the sacred self from the sweating self. You nod, as if you've always known this. There's a sudden scuffle outside the chamber. Two priests arguing over a comb. One claims the other used his ivory brush without permission. The other swears it was community property. Voices rise. The senior priest sighs, mutters something about discipline decay, and sends them both off to meditate beside the statue of Mut, goddess of truth and justice. You smirk. Even the holiest places still have petty wig drama. Later, as the temple quiets, you peek into the archives. Here, tucked between hymns and astronomy charts, you find notes. Yes, actual notes about wig temperature testing. Ideal wax hold achieved between 4th and 5th hour post-sunrise. One reads, another says, if wig begins to hum, remove immediately. Historians still argue whether this was science or superstition. But when your scalp is at stake, does it really matter? By the time you leave the temple, you feel different. Not holier, exactly, but more composed, like someone who knows how many curls can survive a moonlit ritual and still look crisp at sunrise. You walk home slowly, passing courtyards where children chase cats and elderly women gossip while adjusting their head wraps. One of them looks at you, nods approvingly, and murmurs, "Temple wig." You smile. The sun dips low, casting the city in that soft, honeyed light that makes even mud brick look majestic. You catch your reflection in a polished copper basin. Your wig is slightly crooked. Perfect. You wake up slightly earlier today. Maybe it's the breeze. Maybe it's the soft buzzing of a honeybee trying very hard to pollinate your windowsill. Or maybe it's the fact that your scalp is slightly itchy from the ceremonial wig oil. No matter, you've got places to be. Today's journey leads you past the perfume stalls and fig vendors to the artisan quarter. The place where wigs are born, shaped, curled, and occasionally set on fire by overambitious apprentices. The sun rises lazily, casting golden ribbons across the limestone streets. You follow a narrow lane that smells like burnt cedar and hot beeswax. A friendly boy carrying a basket of date syrup waves at you and nearly loses his balance when he sees your priest-approved wig still sitting tight at this hour. Prestige. Clearly, you duck under a linen canopy and step into a workshop run by one of the most celebrated wig makers in Memphis, Tahuti's Curls. The sign features a cartoonishly smug ibis with perfect bangs. Inside, the temperature is several degrees cooler, thanks to strategically placed alabaster bowls of water meant to trap desert heat before it hits the wigs. Tahuti himself greets you with dramatic flair and far too much kohl around his eyes. "Welcome," he purrs, "to the sanctum of strands." You resist the urge to applaud. The workshop is part salon, part laboratory, part controlled hair emergency. Wigs hang from hooks, lie drying on racks, and are curled into submission around clay rollers. Tehuti introduces you to his latest invention, the midday melt test dome. A small, sun-baked enclosure where new wig designs are tested under simulated noontime temperatures. You'd be surprised how many noble clients still request real honey as adhesive. He sighs. It attracts ants. He hands you a strip of papyrus, a checklist used for each wig delivery to the palace. It includes temperature tolerance, sand resistance, anointing absorbency, and ceremonial bounce. You do not ask about the bounce. Some mysteries are sacred. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptian wig makers used imported materials or relied solely on local resources. Some surviving samples suggest a mixed goat hair from Nubia, beeswax from Lower Egypt. Even fine linen strands spun so tightly They mimicked human hair under moonlight. One poorly preserved scroll mentions wigs so fragrant they doubled as insect repellent and love charms. That's what you call dual-purpose engineering. A young assistant named Sinra offers to show you the boiling pots used for setting curls. She's cheerful and unbothered by the open flame 6 inches from her wig stand as she stirs a mixture of palm oil, crushed myrrh, and ground rose quartz. Don't ask, she tells you about the infamous sizzle scandal. Apparently, one pharaoh's concubine insisted on wearing her ceremonial wig during a sun ritual. It melted halfway through, bonded permanently to her scalp, and had to be removed using a paste made of river mud and wine vinegar. She claimed the tingling sensation was divine. Senra says her servants claimed otherwise. You get to try your hand at shaping curls with a heated bronze tong. The trick, Tahuti explains, is to twirl the strand toward the Nile if the wearer's heart leans north, and away if they dream of Thebes. You ask whether this is spiritual or aesthetic. Yes, he replies. In one corner, another apprentice is carefully scenting finished wigs with essential oils. The most popular blend, blue lotus, cinnamon bark, and a single drop of ox milk, 4 volume. They whisper, as if the gods themselves might be listening. By late morning, the workshop feels like a kind of joyful chaos. A noblewoman storms in, furious that her sun-proof daytime wig faded during a hawk-watching ceremony. Tahuti calms her down by offering a complimentary upgrade, his new moon-cooled design. You don't know what that means, and you suspect neither does he. But it works. As you help tidy the racks, you find an old prototype, a wig designed to mimic the crest of a sacred ibis. It looks like a wig crossed with a disgruntled feather duster. One of my braver moments, Tahuti murmurs. The priest of Thoth wore it once, just once. There's a strange comfort in seeing the trial and error behind something so ceremonially revered. Not every curl is a masterpiece. Not every wax holds its line, but each one is a step closer to the divine, or at least not embarrassing yourself in front of Horus. Before you leave, Tahuti insists on giving you a souvenir, a small palm-sized vial labeled Emergency Frizz Balm property of the House of Ra. It smells like lilies and misplaced confidence. Outside, the heat has climbed to its full glory. You take a shortcut through the shade of a colonnaded street, the air shimmering like someone left the oven door open on the city. You think about how many hands went into a single wig, the farmer who raised the goat, the trader who brought the dye, the wig maker who coiled the strands, the priest who whispered blessings over it, and finally, the wearer who walked into the sun and hoped for the best. There's something tender about that, something real, and also slightly itchy. The road back from Tahuti's workshop winds lazily through the city's market quarter, where baskets overflow with onions, pomegranates, and date cakes, and merchants shout half-heartedly in the noonday lull. You pause for a moment under an awning made of painted reeds, tilting your head to let a single bead of sweat trickle from your temple down past your earlobe. The wig holds. For now, you're headed toward one of the most overlooked yet essential institutions in all of ancient Egyptian society, the cold chamber attached to the priestly sanctum, not for storing mummies. No, this is where wigs are kept cool between ceremonies. It's not glamorous. It smells faintly of lotus petals and damp linen, but it's sacred. You push aside a beaded curtain and step into a room whose walls are lined with clay storage jars, each one containing preserved beeswax, crushed lavender, or protective oils that look suspiciously like melted goose fat. A priest named Horemheb stands barefoot in the center, adjusting a fan made of palm ribs. He greets you with a sleepy smile and a joke about how his wig once melted into his porridge during a particularly spirited summer solstice fast. It added texture. He shrugs. You ask him what happens to wigs that do melt. He shows you a sad pile in the corner. We don't waste them. They get re-waxed, re-dyed, re-combed, and sometimes given new ceremonial roles. This one he holds up a flattened tangle that smells like cinnamon is now used to polish the statue of Hathor. Historians still argue whether Egyptians used early refrigeration techniques beyond ice imports. Some believe clay chambers like this one, placed underground and cooled by evaporative jars and night winds, could lower temperatures significantly. One theory suggests they even used a type of mineral salt to line wig racks, absorbing ambient heat. You, however, just enjoy the quiet. As you run your hand along one low shelf, you find a scroll tied with golden thread. It turns out to be a wig recipe, a full list of ingredients: black goat hair, mirror, sap, fig juice, sun-dried reeds, and something poetically described as night air gathered before dawn. Horemheb chuckles. Poetic nonsense. That's just code for cooling it outside before the sun hits. But even nonsense has value. There's a kind of myth-making that happens in these rituals, each step stirring the oils, muttering the prayers. Rubbing the resin into each strand is part science, part spell, part performance art. While you help polish one of the storage jars with a cloth that smells faintly of orange rind, another priest walks in holding a lopsided wig that clearly lost a battle with the sun. It slid halfway off her head during the barley hymn. He whispers, "We're calling it divine release." Everyone nods in solemn agreement. A new euphemism is born. The rituals extend beyond function. Each wig must be cooled. Yes, but also serenaded. One elderly attendant hums lullabies to the curls as he gently brushes them out. They sleep better this way, he explains without blinking. You begin to feel the slow rhythm of the place, the swish of linen, the flutter of feather fans, the low thump of a clay pot lid being sealed. You hear a cat meowing lazily from the outer corridor. No one seems particularly rushed, even though a procession is scheduled in just 2 hours. There is no haste in hair. Someone murmurs like it's a proverb. You decide it probably is. In the far corner sits a small altar not to Ra, or Horus, or Anubis, but to a lesser spirit known only as the Keeper of Cool. A carving depicts a vaguely human figure fanning a priest's head with a giant lily. No one speaks of it, but every now and then, someone nods toward it as if in thanks. One wall of the chamber contains portraits, chalk sketches of particularly famous wigs. That's the one Queen Amosa wore for the sandstorm coronation. Horemheb explains proudly, held up better than the canopy tent. You can't help but notice the wigs are named the Northern Wind, Serpent of Osiris, the Crocodile's Lament. There's even one called Aunt Nebit's Regret. You don't ask. By the time the sun begins to lower slightly in the sky, a runner appears with a scroll. Ceremony moved up. Wig delivery needed. You and Horemheb exchange glances and spring into action. He picks the one that smells like a spice market during the flood season, rich, strange, and vaguely like fermented dates. He dips his fingers into a small urn and dabs something cool along the inner lining. Coriander balm, he mutters, keeps the scalp fresh and the dreams sweeter. You carry the wig together out of the cold chamber, across the sandstone tiles now dappled in late afternoon light. As you walk, you pass a group of young girls weaving reeds into a sunshade shaped like an ankh. One of them giggles when she sees the wig, then covers her mouth reverently. A sacred hairstyle deserves sacred silence. At the temple gates, a guard steps aside, recognizing the braided insignia near the wig's part line. "That's from Tahuti's dome," he whispers, impressed. Must be an important ritual. You pass through with the solemnity of a messenger delivering prophecy, except it's just hair. Glorious, sun-proof, blessed hair. You return to the temple courtyard just as the ceremonial drums begin their slow, deliberate rhythm, low and thunderous, like the sound of distant hooves on clay. The wig in your arms feels heavier now, not physically, but with the gravity of its purpose. Soon, it will sit atop the high chantress of Hathor, whose role tonight is to channel the goddess's essence in a midsummer fertility rite, which, you're told, involves singing very slowly while waving fig branches and not sneezing when incense hits your nostrils. High drama. Ancient edition. Inside the priestess chamber, the air is thick with preparation. Bronze mirrors catch the torchlight and scatter it across linen robes and powdered faces. You hand the wig off to a woman with fingers stained gold from ceremonial paint. She doesn't speak, just nods as she disappears behind a curtain of woven lotus stems. The wig, at this point, is more than a costume piece. It's a sacred conduit, seasoned with centuries of symbolism. In ancient Egypt, wigs weren't just fashion. They were boundaries between purity and the profane. Hair, especially when natural, was messy, mortal, sweat-prone. A wig, carefully prepared and ritually placed, was holy order pressed upon human chaos. One mainstream historical fact: pharaohs and priests alike often shaved their heads, entirely symbolizing rebirth. clarity, and immunity to lice only to immediately don layered wigs made of human hair, wool, or dyed palm fibers. Sometimes, several wigs were stacked for effect, like a turducken of ceremonial headgear. You meander now through the hall of votive offerings, stone jars, copper bowls, a pile of carved onion figurines arranged like a wedding cake. The room smells faintly of myrrh and goat. Behind a marble pedestal, a record keeper sits cross-legged, nibbling on a dried apricot. You glance at his wax tablet, a list of names, likely those who donated their real hair to the temple for wig making. Some entries are marked with tiny ink symbols, purified. The man explains with a wink. There's an open scholarly debate about whether some wigs were crafted not just for humans but also for temple statues. Some argue these were permanent adornments. Others believe the wigs were rotated seasonally, different styles for planting versus harvest ceremonies. You picture Hathor's statue trying on a summer bob. You're summoned to the rehearsal chamber. Yes, there is one. Even divine ceremonies need a little blocking practice. Inside, robed figures hum in near-perfect unison while slowly moving their arms like kelp swaying underwater. The chantress, now fully dressed, tilts her head this way and that, testing how the wig moves. It holds beautifully. You suspect Tahuti's goose fat wax mixture had something to do with it. A young acolyte nervously bumps a bronze gong. Everyone freezes. Sorry, she squeaks. Wrong beat. The temple's dance master raises one eyebrow and mutters something about channeling the divine with tempo awareness. You decide to keep your head down and focus on the floor's intricate reed mat pattern. Out in the courtyard, temple workers set up a misting arch, a clever invention involving water jars and linen strips that cool the air as guests pass through. You stand under it for a while, feeling tiny droplets collect along your collarbone. It feels like standing inside a fig. Back inside, the final preparations swirl into place. The sacred wig is brushed one last time with what appears to be a feather duster dipped in chamomile tea. Someone mutters a protection chant. Another priest places a tiny papyrus scroll under the wig's inner lining. Perhaps a prayer. Perhaps a list of tonight's hymn changes. Either way, the goddess now has notes. There's a kind of tension now. Not anxious, but the soft, humming suspense that always precedes performance. You hear rustling linen, murmured incantations, and the occasional whispered joke about that time a wig caught fire from a blessing candle. We said it was divine combustion. Someone giggles. As the sun lowers beyond the temple columns, the ceremony begins. You watch from the side. Partially hidden behind a column wrapped in date palm fronds, the chantress steps forward, her wig glinting under the torchlight, every curve and twist of hair catching the glow like a halo sculpted from shadow. She raises her hands. The drums slow. The fig branches sway. The audience priests, nobles, curious cats fall silent. She sings, and it is not just a performance. It's something between breathing and memory. A song older than the language used to write it down. The wig holds steady, unmelting, unbothered, utterly regal. It becomes a crown of intention, devotion, and let's be honest, excellent craftsmanship. Historians still argue whether this level of ritual polish was common or reserved only for festivals involving fertility gods and foreign envoys. Some scrolls suggest even minor household gods received this level of preparation. Others believe it was limited to state-sanctioned deities. Either way, tonight feels special. By the time the final chant fades and the last fig branch is lowered, you realize something unexpected. You are genuinely proud, not just of the wig's structural integrity, but of its journey from Tahuti's dome to the cooling room, from beeswax clumps to sacred centerpiece. As you help gather leftover oil jars and brush off sandal scuffs from the matting, a priest presses a small token into your hand. It's a carved comb ivory, inlaid with blue faience. For your service, he says, and your silence about the goose wax. You nod solemnly. What happens in the wig chamber stays in the wig chamber. You wake early the next morning, or perhaps you never quite slept. The temple courtyard is quiet now, blanketed in soft golden light. and the distant shuffle of sandals on sandstone. The ceremonial wig rests safely in its cedar box, tucked away in the cool recesses of the archive chamber. With the reverence of a sacred relic and the faint smell of lavender wax, your feet carry you toward the artisan's quarters, where the real post-ceremony work begins. You pass a sleepy dog draped like a toga over a sun-warmed stair. A boy delivers honeyed barley cakes to the apprentices, who are already arguing about whose wig base survived the night with the fewest pin shifts. You step over a dropped comb and nod to a young scribe sketching new hairstyle diagrams beside a basket of dyed goat hair. Wigs in ancient Egypt, especially those worn by high-ranking individuals and priests, weren't one-size-fits-all. They followed trends. Fashion, after all, is eternal. Whether you're a Roman senator or a 17th dynasty embalmer's daughter. One season it might be tight curls down to the shoulder. The next a straight bob with flared ends. Some featured elaborate braiding that would make modern hairstylists weep gently into their pomade, and the coloring, black was preferred, of course, signifying fertility, strength, and the Nile's life-giving silt. But red wigs had their moment too, often dyed with henna or crushed carob pods. These were typically worn during rituals involving passion, war, or according to one scroll theatrical dramatics of the upper court, which you suspect is the ancient Egyptian phrase for temple soap opera. You help Tahuti inspect a new shipment of materials. The palm fibers are coarse, but the indigo-stained linen threads glint like wet beetle wings. He sniffs the wax with the same gravity one might apply to sacred scrolls or possibly wine. Too salty, he mutters, discarding one jar. Last thing you want is a wig that tastes like the Red Sea. Historians still argue whether wigs were perfumed consistently or just on special occasions. Some argue the perfumes myrrh, lotus oil, blue cornflower distillate were for spiritual purposes. Others say they were practical, smelly wigs in 100-degree heat were never in fashion. You suspect it was both. A divine presence shouldn't reek of sweat and camel. Tahuti shows you a prototype, a half wig designed for laborers, lighter, airy, and padded only where the sun hits hardest. He calls it the noon cap. You call it half a haircut. Still, it might catch on. Functionality has always been the mother of all strange styles. A knock at the chamber door reveals an envoy from Thebes, draped in turquoise robes and carrying a letter sealed with beeswax. Apparently, the High Temple there is impressed by your craftsmanship and wants 10 ceremonial wigs for their annual procession. In 3 weeks, you pretend not to hear Tahuti whisper, "We'll need more goats." You begin sorting the materials, this time with a checklist scratched onto papyrus. Number of curls, 246. Goose fat wax, double batch, decorative inlays, faience. Only no lapis this time. It flakes. You look over the pattern design again. A 7-braid swirl with a gold leaf fringe. Not easy, but very divine tear drama. Nearby, a younger apprentice hums while carving ivory pins. She's new and just learned about the wig hierarchies, a sort of ranking system determining who gets what density, color, and ornamentation. She says one priest demanded a style that mimicked the crown of Lower Egypt. You nod sagely and respond, "Well, it is the season for floral motifs." The scent of drying reed glue drifts in, mingled with the faintest notes of citrus oil. You stop for a moment, blinking at the sunlight filtering through the lattice window. It dances across your workbench like spilled honey. There's a moment of calm. Then someone sneezes on a batch of flax braids, and you're back in it. Sanitizing braids with diluted vinegar isn't exactly glamorous, but it's how sacred hair survives another century. You overhear another wig maker sharing a theory. What if the wigs weren't just symbolic or protective, but were also early tools of identity masking like disguises during political unrest or temple drama? Historians still argue, she says dramatically, whether Queen Hatshepsut used a wig to infiltrate rival ceremonies. You chuckle. The ancient world did love a theatrical plot twist. As the day wears on, you prepare the dye vats, one pot for henna, another for walnut ink, and a small jar labeled Royal Purple. Do not touch seriously. You don't, but you do sniff it. Smells like crushed figs and iron filings. Another courier arrives, this time with a tiny tiny package, 2 ostrich feathers, and a polite note from the priestess. For balance and flair. You can't argue with that. By late afternoon, you've woven 3 bases, twisted 30 tiny coils, and burned your thumb on a copper curling rod. The chantress's understudy stops by to try on her rehearsal wig. It slides a little to the left. You tighten the pins. She yawns mid-pose. Divinity is exhausting, she mumbles. As twilight gathers once more, you step outside. The temple's shadow stretches long across the courtyard. A silent, inky guardian. You look down at your hands sticky with wax, dusted in flax, and smelling faintly of lemongrass. You smile, because somewhere between sacred geometry, sweat, and goose grease, you helped shape the very image of divinity. And the wigs, they haven't melted once. You wander the markets of Memphis the next day, mostly for inspiration but also for wig gossip, which is surprisingly abundant if you know where to loiter. Beneath a faded awning of linen dyed sun-scorched pink, you pause beside a vendor selling figurines carved with impossible wigs, styles so top-heavy you wonder if they ever existed, or if some artisan just got bored and thought, why not stack 4 birds on top? One of the figurines has a tiny inscription scratched beneath it. Something about the collapse at the Garden of Hathor. You grin. Another fashion fiasco. You tuck that away for later. Fashion failures, after all, are as eternal as the Nile, and nowhere are they better documented or whispered about than in the archives of the Temple of Heket, which is exactly where you're heading now. Scroll satchel in hand, sandals slightly dusty, and absolutely no intention of rewriting history, just peeking at its messier wig-related corners. Inside the temple archive, a keeper named Baki, who has eyebrows like broom bristles and a laugh like falling pots, hands you a scroll labeled simply, River Incidents, Volume T, promising. You unwind it carefully and begin reading sideways, because for some reason, this scribe decided vertical columns were too mainstream. One incident tells of Lady Kenu, a court singer known for her breathtaking voice and even more breathtaking braid tower, which allegedly reached the base of her spine. It was carefully sculpted with lamb grease and peony wax, balanced using polished copper pins, and took 3 assistants 2 hours to apply. At a royal garden party, she leaned just slightly too far toward a roast goose and splat. Her hair ignited like kindlings. Panic. Screaming. Dignitaries flinging fig wine. A priest smothered the flame with a linen napkin, but not before Kenu's entire top knot melted into a sticky helmet. The event was so memorable that years later, pulling a Kenu became slang for overdoing anything, from hair to eyeliner to boasting about how many oxen you inherited from your uncle's 3rd wife. Even the gods, apparently, disapproved of excessive pomade. Further down the scroll, a priest's wig lost during a flood. Not swept away, no. That would be too ordinary. It floated out during a storm while he was bathing, and somehow landed in a boat full of Roman diplomats visiting early. For hours, no one could figure out why a soaked hairpiece sat grinning atop a fruit basket. Historians still argue, Baki notes helpfully, whether that incident was divine sabotage or simple clumsiness. You lean toward the latter, but wouldn't be surprised if a minor deity had decided to have a laugh. Some of them were like that. You run your finger over another tale. The great ceremony of Seishat's quills, during which a senior scribe's wig came undone mid-blessing and slowly unraveled down the temple steps like a snail making a dramatic exit. The children watching thought it was part of the show. Applause followed. The poor man had to bow 5 extra times to pretend he'd planned it. But it wasn't just personal embarrassment at stake. In elite circles, your wig represented your status, your connections, even your piety. To lose your wig, or worse, to be seen with a crooked or damaged one, was like walking into Pharaoh's court with your tunic tucked into your sandals. You pause at a strange entry titled, The Ibis Distraction. Apparently, a backup wig was once snatched off a storage rack by a temple pet. An overly curious ibis named Hekenu, who believed everything was either food or nesting material. He flew the wig to the temple roof and sat on it for 3 hours. The ritual had to be delayed, while acolytes clapped and waved incense to coax the bird down. When it finally dropped the wig, it landed perfectly on the statue of Maat, and nobody dared touch it after that. Divine placement, they called it. You call it an avian accident. Outside the archive, The midday heat curls the air. You rest on a shaded bench, still laughing quietly to yourself. The wigs may have been symbols of decorum and prestige, but they were also fragile, meltable, bird-stealable, and comically fallible. And in that, somehow, they were wonderfully human. Later, you run into a traveling wig maker from Heracleopolis who shares a new formula he's experimenting with. Powdered lotus root mixed with powdered limestone, blended into a fine setting dust. It holds better in the heat. He claims, unless it rains, then you just become a statue. He shrugs like this is fine. You pretend to be impressed, but inwardly, your goose grease beeswax blend is still top tier. You return to your chamber that evening with a few new sketches, some half-melted memories, and one papyrus labeled Backup Pins Emergency Edition. It features diagrams of clever ways to stash pins inside armbands, sashes, even sandal straps. Genius. You never know when an ibis might strike. The sky above the Nile turns orange and pink, then soft lavender. You set your scrolls aside, flex your fingers sore from comb weaving, and whisper thanks to Hathor, patron of music, beauty, and apparently disaster prevention. And as the last of the sun drips below the horizon, you realize something important. It was never about just keeping wigs from melting. It was about adapting, laughing, and recovering gracefully from even the most public unraveling, especially when your wig ends up in a fruit basket. You wake the next morning with a crick in your neck and a single hairpin lodged suspiciously under your back. Not the worst surprise the Nile has offered. Still, as the temple bells chime and sunlight crawls over your shutters like a polite scorpion, today's focus isn't drama or disasters. It's naps, specifically, how you and every wig-wearing Egyptian who valued their appearance and sanity managed to rest without waking up looking like a bird's nest. Sleep, for the ancient elite, was less a passive event and more a carefully orchestrated production. If your head was home to an architectural wonder of twists, waxes, and linen-threaded curls, you couldn't just flop into bed like a goat after market day. You needed a strategy. Enter the clay headrest, an uncomfortable-looking device that resembles a mini footstool, but make it ceremonial. You approach one now in your chamber, its crescent top smoothed from centuries of usage, its base etched with protective symbols for balance and not waking up with your hair glued to your cheek. You lower yourself slowly, trying not to sigh too loudly, and nestle your neck just above it. The idea was to suspend the head gently, allowing your elaborate wig to float untouched and unmelted above the mat. It's like sleeping mid-air. If mid-air were made of sun-baked pottery and optimism, historians still argue whether these headrests were truly comfortable or just a massive cultural inside joke passed down through generations of priests and nobles. Some say they promoted better dreams. Others say they promoted neck pain and sarcastic hieroglyphs. But it wasn't just about suspension. Many households developed wig protective rituals before bed. Servants would lightly powder the scalp and wig with cooling, crushed lotus petals, believed to deter insects and humidity. Others draped thin linen veils soaked in chamomile water across the perimeter of the hairline, secured with pins so tiny you could lose one just blinking at it. There were even oil burners designed to release sandalwood and frankincense vapors into the room, not for spirituality, but because those particular scents discouraged mold. Yes, even divine wigs could mildew if you weren't careful. You remember the tale of priest Ramesu, whose neglected nighttime routine resulted in a colony of fungus so dramatic it was later immortalized in a temple mural labeled "Decay Without Honor." By now, you've drifted into your own daily rhythm. Morning wig maintenance, midday temple duty, late afternoon gossip with the Wig Makers Guild. But it's the twilight rituals that bring the most satisfaction. Tonight, you light your own oil lamp, letting the flame flicker softly as you perform what's essentially the ancient Egyptian version of a bedtime skincare routine. But for your wig, you untie the stabilizing bands. You gently dust away the day's sweat with a feather brush dipped in rose water. You check the beeswax core, not too soft, not too stiff. You murmur a short spell for protection, not because you fully believe it, but because your mother used to say it worked, and honestly, you're not taking chances. Not after last week's linen curl collapse during the offering dance. You place the wig carefully on its own little altar, Yes, an actual wig altar lined with alabaster and tiny ivory lions. You step back, bow once, whisper, don't melt, then step into your bed mat and prepare to sleep upright. Or rather, semi-upright, balanced between two supportive bolsters stuffed with dried reeds and perfumed wool. Before drifting off, you recall that tomorrow is the Festival of Scented Winds, where everyone wears their most outrageous wig for a temple parade through the incense garden. There are rumors someone's working on a wig shaped like a falcon this year. Another rumor says it sings. You sigh, amused and a little intimidated. You may have mastered a cooling cones and linen mists, but musical wigs, that's a different class of ambition. As the night deepens, you finally exhale. The perfume vapors calm your breath. Somewhere in the courtyard, a servant chuckles quietly, probably slipping on another forgotten headpin. Your wig sleeps peacefully beside you, untouched, unmelted, and maybe even grateful. And in this tiny corner of eternity, you've done the impossible. You've preserved a masterpiece made of hair, wax, and wild invention, all in a place where the sun cooks stone before breakfast. Just don't roll over. Your eyes open to a faint glow, sunlight filtered through reed blinds, catching on dust motes that dance like shy spirits. Your neck is slightly sore, but your wig, thankfully, is intact. Success. You've outwitted gravity and heat for yet another night. But this isn't just about sleep or fashion anymore. As you rise and reach for your linen robes, you reflect on the broader role wigs played in ancient Egyptian life, not just as accessories, but as emblems of status, health, and even cosmic order. And yes, their continued existence during the scalding midday sun. Today is a special day. You're visiting the House of Life, a temple archive where scribes record not just prayers, but practical knowledge like wig recipes, scalp ointments, and hair dye formulas made from fermented leeks. Yes, leeks again. You walk through the marketplace, your wig lightly perfumed with myrrh oil. Children run past, giggling as a man sells fake side locks to tourists who want to look vaguely priestly. A goat tries to eat a scroll. Typical Tuesday, inside the House of Life. It's cool, shadowed, and filled with the soft scrape of reed pens on papyrus. You're handed a record by an apprentice scribe, who proudly informs you it's a 300-year-old instruction manual for high-heat wig preservation. You raise an eyebrow. He blushes. The manual describes various wig cores, some made with beeswax, others with stiffened palm fiber. The key, apparently, was layering. Alternating soft and stiff fibers allowed wigs to flex without melting. Think of it like a primitive air conditioning system built right into your scalp. Historians still argue whether the so-called cooling braid technique, where hollow reeds were woven into the inner wig ring, actually worked, or was just a very stylish way to collect forehead sweat. You skim through diagrams of what looks suspiciously like a hair-based swamp cooler and smile. Innovation takes strange shapes. Back in the real world, you walk past the dye room, where two women argue about which shade of indigo is temple appropriate. Another is boiling onions to produce a honey-colored gloss for wig highlights. You pause to sniff. It's weirdly pleasant. One fact jumps out from a tablet displayed in a carved niche. During the reign of Hatshepsut, it was illegal to wear certain wigs unless you'd passed a religious scalp purity inspection. Apparently, head lice were considered a spiritual offense during festivals. You wonder if any priest ever flunked the inspection and had to go home in disgrace. Bareheaded under the desert sun. Probably. There's always a disgraced priest in every good scroll. As you exit the archive, you pass a little street where wig makers and barbers work side by side. You spot a boy fanning a wax mold with an ostrich feather while chanting, "Don't melt, don't melt," like it's a sacred hymn. Nearby, a woman balances her wig on a jar of cooled mud while mixing powdered coal for her eyes. It's all so bizarrely ordinary, functional, reverent. You pause under a palm tree, adjust your wig slightly. It's warm, but not dangerously so. You know your scalp will be sweaty by mid-afternoon. But that's part of the price of divinity by design. These wigs weren't made for comfort. They were made for transformation, for becoming something shinier, more fragrant, more radiant than the sweaty mortal underneath. That night, At the Festival of Scented Winds, you join the candlelit procession through the Lotus Courtyard. The wigs around you shimmer in flickering gold. One is shaped like a cobra coiled mid-hiss. Another features real shells that jingle softly. Yours, simple, elegant, steady. Yours will survive the night. A high priest raises his staff, calling for silence. And for one sacred moment, under the moonlight, all the wigs coated in centuries of knowledge, melted and remolded. Stitched and perfumed stand as quiet monuments to the weird brilliance of human persistence. You exhale. It's been a long day, but your head feels lighter now, and your wig still hasn't melted. The night deepens. You step away from the festival crowd, your sandals whispering across the sandstone. The laughter and harp music soften behind you as you head toward the temple's reflecting pool, where a few fellow wig wearers sit cooling their ankles in the still water. You dip a toe in. It's chilly shocking. Actually, a marvel, considering you're in a desert. But this is Egypt, where nothing is ever quite what it seems, and your wig, still glued to your dignity like a sacred beetle to its rolling ball of importance. One woman beside you carefully removes her wig, revealing a shaved head painted with tiny lotus blossoms. She sets her wig on a lacquered stand, lets it cool, and nods approvingly at the sheen. You compliment her craftsmanship. She tells you her husband is a baker, and they cure wigs in his oven after hours low heat. Lots of sand insulation, no complaints. It turns out that during Akhenaten's rule, there was a tax imposed on wig powder. Yep. You needed an official stamp to purchase aromatic starch. Wig smugglers were a thing. They'd hide little pouches of cedar-infused starch in their sandals, disguised as heel supports. One papyrus even claims that an entire caravan of smugglers was foiled because someone sneezed too fragrantly. Historians still argue whether that tax was economic punishment or a veiled political jab at temple wig makers who, at that time, were gaining too much popularity. Apparently, fashion was a threat to the state. Sounds familiar. You lean back against a cool pillar. Somewhere in the courtyard, a flute begins to play slow, winding, tired. Your wig sits snugly, having survived the fire of day and the perfume of night. Around you, candle flames bob on the water like glowing onions, a fitting tribute. And then, the temple bell chimes once, low and slow. Time for sleep. Time to return your borrowed beauty to its lacquered rest. You duck into your chamber, unpin the delicate ties beneath your chin, and gently remove the day's crown. A small clay cradle awaits it, lined with fine linen, stuffed with crushed mint and cedar. You rest the wig inside and whisper a blessing, half sincere, half silly. May you not frizz, may you not sag, and may Horus bless your shine. You wrap your head in a sleep cloth, soft linen dipped in lavender oil, just as your grandmother taught you. Her wig had ivory tips shaped like falcon feathers. She once beat a tax collector with it. Legend. You lie down. Outside, the night air hums with incense, footsteps, and quiet conversations between priests and stars. It's been a long journey through layers of wax, ritual, satire, and sheer stubborn design. And somehow, the thing you once thought ridiculous, a decorative scalp cover, feels like a thread that connects you not just to vanity, but to survival, ceremony, identity, and sleep. And now, soft breaths, slow thoughts, warm linen. You're safe. You're still. You are ancient and ridiculous and radiant. The breeze outside rustles the reeds, a lazy hush like pages turning in a scroll forgotten by time. Your limbs grow heavy, wrapped in linen and laughter. Let your mind soften now, like beeswax in the evening shade. Every detail, the cedar powder, the hollow braids, the whispered prayers to Horus, fades gently into the distance. There is no pressure here, no sun to outwit, no hairline to protect. Just the quiet weight of your body settling, like a wig cradled in cool clay. The voices of the temple become echoes. The scent of lavender, barely clinging to the folds of your sleep cloth, melts into the night. The gods are quiet. The stars above blink slowly. Your scalp is at peace. You've worn your pride well today, and tomorrow can wait. For now, just breathe in, let go. And remember, even in the driest heat of history, someone was worrying about their hair melting, and they still slept.